We're going to move next to the topic of efficiency and how that becomes a market. And to talk about that, the CEO of Open Energy Efficiency, Matt Golden.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I am here to talk about energy efficiency, and that's a topic in these distributed energy resource conversations that sometimes get left on the table. And that's really a relic of how we've been doing efficiency in the past, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're using smart meter data and to turn energy efficiency into a true energy resource that can help solve some of the very problems that were talked about on the last panel. So in general, when we think about energy efficiency, we think of insulation and lots of individual measures, but at an aggregate level, we're really building power plants. These are big megawatt power plants that serve very much the same purpose. And when you build a power plant, you finance it using project finance. It's based on the long-term cash flows that come from selling power from that power plant. However, in energy efficiency, which is every bit as big as a wedge when it comes to decarbonizing the electric grid and hitting our energy and climate goals as really all of these distributed resources and supply side resources, instead of using project finance, we're using credit cards, unsecured finance, consumer debt, and we're using rebates, which are really something more equivalent to a rebate, to a coupon you might get from Bed Bath & Beyond than an actual resource. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is how we are moving now from traditional programs, and this is probably what you guys are come to expect in energy efficiency. There's some sort of rebate that's paid in advance based on a model, a deemed savings calculation. Once it's paid, essentially there's a series of rules and regulations that are put in place to ensure that the results are actually there. Because if you pay in advance for something that isn't even measured at the end, what do you have to do to actually ensure that the results are there? You need all sorts of checks and balances and regulation. That has resulted in a really complicated and expensive approach that frankly is at the end of its line. It's no longer scaling. We are roughly spending $1 in public funding, whether that be ratepayer or some sort of tax public money, for every $1 that comes in as private money. And when you break that down even further, you find that for every dollar that we spend on these public programs, often as much as half of that is going to administration, because it's just frankly so hard to ensure that folks are doing the right thing when all the incentives are misaligned, when they've been paid in advance. So this represents a huge opportunity, and really as we emerge into this new world where it's not just about baseload savings anymore, but it's a much more complicated environment where we have all sorts of distributed generation resources and new distributed energy resources coming online. The question is, how does energy efficiency emerge from a program aimed at baseload using public money in advance to something that actually turns into a market and can be used to address these very real issues on the grid? So this is what we're experiencing in California. Every afternoon, during especially the fall, and also the spring when we don't have other resources online like air conditioners to actually absorb the load, we have this huge bubble of renewables, mostly solar, coming on in the late afternoon. You guys, I'm sure, are familiar with the duck curve, but what's interesting is when you look at our the actual curves that we're getting from the CAISO, we're right on target. So what we're seeing is that this afternoon peak, which in the past has been really what we've focused our energies on. We've said, look, it's all about air conditioning efficiency at that peak. It's now a valley, and that changes the game really fundamentally. So in California, when we look at the CAISO, our independent systems operating market, we find that during any given time period, we're dipping into the negative in terms of energy pricing on almost a daily basis. And this is happening in the afternoon. It's primarily happening in the shoulder months, meaning the spring and the fall, when we have all this solar production occurring, but we don't yet have a lot of air conditioning load. So we literally have more electrons than we know what to do with, and we have to pay people to take those electrons. So this is a huge problem for the grid. Creates instability and really a new dynamic in the market that we're not even entirely sure how to, and that's really what the last panel, and I think a lot of the conversation is, no one really knows what the solution is ultimately. But it's not going to be one solution. It's going to be silver buckshot, not silver bullet. We're going to need all of the storage we can get. We're going to need demand response. We're going to need volt-var. We're going to need to charge our cars at the right time in the right places to balance this grid. But the piece that I want to talk about is really the least cost approach to shaping load, which is energy efficiency. So again, energy efficiency, because in the past, we've always basically looked at it as this base load resource that maybe we figure out how much we saved 4 years later after a consulting report comes out. We're now moving into a world where we have the data and the computational power to track and turn energy efficiency into something that is really different. In fact, we're not even calling it energy efficiency anymore. We're calling it demand capacity. And demand capacity is savings plus time and location. And when we get aggregated portfolios of efficiency projects, we get very high confidence intervals, not just in energy savings, but we get load shape. And that load shape is much more valuable in this distributed market because not only is it about saving energy, but it can be used to balance the grid in this new paradigm and really enable us to bring the clean energy resources that we need onto the grid and to achieve our goals. And this is not instead of storage or other DERs, this is in conjunction with those DERs. And we're really going to need all of these DERs firing on all cylinders if we're going to basically make room for the volume of renewables that we need to hit our climate and energy goals. So this is how we've done it in the past. What we're doing today, and this is actually happening in California, it's been legislated, and we have pilot projects starting in this fall with PG&E taking the lead. We're moving to a model of pay for performance. So rather than pay a rebate in advance and have a whole bunch of regulation that tries to ensure that the results are there, and we have to pick winning technologies and basically pick business models in advance, we're moving to what we call pay for performance or for metered capacity. So we have a system in California that we've developed called CalTrack, which is based on an open source platform called the Open EE Meter, which enables all parties to track energy savings in a standard way using smart meter data. It will also work on monthly, but with monthly you just don't get load shape. So we're metering the savings, so so instead of paying in advance based on a calculation, we're paying on performance based on actual results. And instead of the utility getting paid a ratepayer incentive for their work in kind of the traditional sense where you send out a coupon and some consultant comes in at the end and determines if the savings were there and they get a regulated rate of return, the utility is actually moving efficiency out of that bucket into their procurement bucket and starting to look at energy efficiency as a resource. That means it's no longer how cheap can that rebate be. It's really a function of what's the alternative. If they don't get energy efficiency savings in a given location in a given time, they're going to be buying more batteries, or they're going to be having more demand response calls, and how much do those cost? And it turns out when you look at it through this paradigm, energy efficiency is first off a very inexpensive resource, so when blended with storage and other technologies, we bring down the overall cost. But it's also subject to an enormous existing market, which doesn't frankly know that they're in the energy efficiency market for the most part. So in the US, we're doing something like $40 billion a year in energy efficiency products across all sectors. And then in particular in energy efficiency in California, as a good example, we have property assessed clean energy that did $500 million in residential efficiency in California last year. Today, another securitization was announced, which I believe is the 8th PACE securitization. We're on track to nearly $1 billion in financing this coming year. The problem that we're overcoming, and it's really not a problem with PACE, it's a policy problem, is these PACE providers have no incentive to care about our societal energy goals or carbon. Their job is to move capital. So we're moving into a new paradigm where energy efficiency that's measured and metered is, first of all, very reliable. And so in the past, when we take this as an engineering model, this is kind of what it looks like. You know, it's very hard to predict savings on individual assets accurately. But the good news, and this is really the transition from engineering to finance and moving into markets, is that when you look at portfolios of projects, what you get is very consistent standard deviations, very consistent portfolio level performance. And really this is the difference between trying to be right all the time, which is engineering, and trying to be right at a portfolio level, which is really fundamentally finance. So these aggregators, it could be PACE providers, but it really also could be vertically integrated contractors or anybody else that can figure out a business model to reach customers, can package these savings and turn around and sell those savings to the utility as a form of demand capacity. And so we're very excited that just in the last month, the Public Utilities Commission in California has approved PG&E's pay for performance pilot in the residential sector, which will basically put out a price signal and say, we're buying energy savings. Aggregators who can deliver projects and figure out how to reach customers such as these PACE providers, you can sign a savings purchase agreement, an SPA, with the utility that will establish a price. The data that those aggregators need to understand the yields that they're getting is all available to them. They can access the smart meter interval data with customer permission. They have the data on the projects. And now their business model begins to shift. We're sending a signal into the market that says, this is what's important to us. We want real documented savings, and we need it in certain places and certain times. And the marketplace, rather than picking individual technologies, rather than saying it's a Nest thermostat or it's insulation or an HVAC system of 90% or greater, or however we structured these programs in the past, gives way to a new model where it's the marketplace. It's companies competing to figure out how to put together technologies, different types of delivery mechanisms, identify the houses where the biggest opportunities are, to deliver efficiency products in the right place and the right time to maximize that benefit. And in the example of the PACE providers, their business model changes from being moving the most money into the market as possible into energy efficiency products, which is a good overall objective, to a new business model that says the most profitable companies and the most exciting business models and that will work for customers are going to be those companies that can figure out how to move the most capital into the market, but into the projects that deliver the most valuable benefits. So this fundamental change for energy efficiency enables us to look at energy efficiency no longer as just base load capacity, but as a really demand capacity, something that as a procurement person at a utility whose job it is to keep the lights on, can look at energy efficiency as another distributed energy resource that you can bring to bear in the market to balance load, to change that shape so that we can bring the order of magnitude more renewables that we need online and achieve our goals. And we're just not going to do it with any single silver bullet. It's going to be as much storage as we can get, as much DR as we can get, as much volt var and car charging as we can get, but it's also going to be, in large part, energy efficiency and permanent load shape being driven through these market players, figuring out how to deliver those services to customers. So thank you all very much, and I'm excited to see this transition happen. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks, Matt.